This is a modern American president being sworn into office. And this is a Russian ruler being sworn into office in 1613. Okay, maybe that last one doesn't count because it's not really an example of getting caught. But for most of history, when politicians were corrupt, they didn't get to retire to a cushy consulting gig. They got punished. Here are 5 ways that corrupt politicians used to be punished. Ancient times, we've talked about how ancient Rome was notoriously corrupt, so let's start there. Roman senators could be fined for a variety of offenses, from extortion to accepting bribes to, having an orgy with a prostitute in the Senate. Now, while a hefty fine might sound like a pretty easy punishment, it was actually intended to be a kind of death sentence. Romans believed that paying a fine would bring bad luck to the payer and their family, and it was expected that anyone who paid a fine of more than 5,000 sesterces, about 1,000 modern US dollars, would immediately kill themselves. And even smaller fines were expected to cause serious financial ruin. So, if you were a poor senator who accepted a bribe of, say, 5,000 sesterces, you were basically screwed either way. Medieval era, back in the Middle Ages, the punishment for bribery was often a symbolic one. A corrupt official would be publicly stripped of their ill-gotten gains. In theory, this wasn't supposed to hurt them very much. After all, they had stolen the money, so it wasn't like they had any right to it. But in practice, this meant that the sheriff, who took a bribe to release a prisoner, would then have to walk barefoot through the streets while the prisoner, whom he just helped escape, watched from atop his shoulder. Ouch. Other punishments involved the corrupt politician literally carrying the weight of their crime. In 14th century Florence, officials found guilty of accepting bribes were forced to wear a special kind of costume that weighed 100 pounds. Yeah, that sounds like a fate worse than death. Colonial and early modern period, as late as the 19th century, bribery and other forms of corruption were widespread in the United States. And while many people have heard of the famous case of Boss Tweed, the corrupt New York politician who was eventually sentenced to 12 years in prison, that was actually the exception rather than the rule. More commonly, corrupt officials were exiled from the city or state in which they had committed their crimes. Boston, Massachusetts, had a particularly colorful tradition of exiling corrupt politicians. The first recorded case of this was in 1786, when John Hancock, yes, that John Hancock, was accused of accepting a bribe while he was governor of Massachusetts. Although there was never any solid evidence against him, Hancock was essentially forced to resign and then spend the rest of his life in exile. He died in 1793 without ever setting foot in Massachusetts again. 20th century examples. Even as recently as the 20th century, there were plenty of examples of corrupt politicians being punished. In 1989, the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, found himself embroiled in a corruption scandal when it was revealed that he had accepted expensive gifts from a close friend. Although he denied wrongdoing, Lee resigned from office and was fined the equivalent of about $650,000. More recently, in 2017, Malaysia's Prime Minister Najib Razak was forced to resign after it was revealed that he had embezzled over $1 billion from a government-owned investment fund. Symbolic punishments, of course. Sometimes the punishment for political corruption is symbolic rather than literal. In 2008, when Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich was arrested on corruption charges, the state legislature voted to remove his pension and benefits. And in 2015, when Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe admitted to accepting illegal campaign donations, he was publicly reprimanded by the Virginia State Board of Elections